Rogue One, the first in a series of spin-off films from Lucasfilm that chronicles the story of the rebel spies that actually stole the plans to the original Death Star. It was directed by Gareth Edwards, who also helmed the 2014 Godzilla film, and focuses on the rogue criminal Jyn Erso, played by Felicity Jones, whose father, Galen Erso, was the original architect for the Death Star. Now, I didn't talk a lot about this film when it came out last December, but given that the Blu-ray is just around the corner on April 4th, I thought this would be the perfect time to give my point of view on the film. Because after all, many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view. To be perfectly honest, this was the first Star Wars film that I wasn't really hungry for. Because it was a standalone film, it didn't really tie into the Skywalker saga or the core Star Wars films. The prospect of having a standalone movie with a whole bunch of original characters didn't sound as great of an idea, I guess, as the trilogy stories did. When the credits rolled, I knew I had a blast, I knew it was a good movie, but there wasn't enough there to really make me want to go see it on repeated views. Now, I just saw the film for my second time all the way through, and has my opinion changed at all? Well, not really. Aside from I did realize that there was a little more emotional resonance in there than I noticed the first time around. But ultimately I felt that Rogue One focuses a little more on connecting the dots to the earlier Star Wars films than really giving you some fleshed out, meaty new characters. And that was my overall main issue with the film. Star Wars is known for having a legacy of memorable heroes that we all clung on to. And I know that a lot of people are going to argue that, well, with the original trilogy we had 3 films to get to know the characters, but the original Star Wars film back in '77 was so iconic and became such a part of our culture that people knew who Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, and Han Solo were before sequels even came out. With Rogue One, even going through it a second time and trying to pinpoint all the characters, I had a really hard time remembering who was who. Now, unlike Edwards' 2014 Godzilla, in which I did feel that most of the human characters in that film were extremely bland, that's not the case here. The characters are fine, they're very fun, they're very likable, but aside from some personality quips and some fun character interactions, there wasn't a whole lot else there to really motivate the characters, and I kept asking myself, why should I really care about these characters past this initial film? Let me put it to you this way. Remember at the end of the original Star Wars, the Battle of Yavin, when you had all of the rebel pilots going after the Death Star? Yeah, you got to know them and they were kind of fun, but you weren't really focusing on them, were you? No, you were probably focusing on Luke Skywalker as he made his initial run down the Death Star trench. Just imagine if most of that film followed the exploits of Red Squadron. Probably be a very different film overall, wouldn't you say? So what about the film's female protagonist, Jyn Erso? Well, to be honest, she fit the bill. She was fine. I haven't seen Felicity Jones in really anything else to really compare her performance in this film against other films she's done. But essentially, she's that troubled youth whose family was broken apart by the Empire at a young age, and because she's experienced both sides of the war, she doesn't really feel any obligations to join the rebels or the Empire. She's totally a part of it. So her character development in this film, she's basically the same character. She's a skeptic at the beginning, and toward the end of the film she finds something to fight for, but she's really just a true rebel all the way through. The other character I really liked was Cassian Andor, played by Diego Luna, who is charged with ultimately going to an Imperial stronghold and extracting Galen Erso from the Empire. It's revealed pretty early on that Cassian has a hidden agenda, but he also has a moral compass, and it's very obvious that he's able to break orders if it's the right thing to do. So he is one of those characters, very much like Lando in The Empire Strikes Back, who you don't really like at the beginning, and then he becomes very likable toward the end. So he does become a hero. There isn't anything really special between Jyn Erso and Cassian. In terms of the relationship, it does kind of blossom at the end. There is this beautiful shot of them kind of embracing each other on the beach of Scarif, which is the main Imperial stronghold that the epic final battle of the film takes place in, and they're just on the beach embracing. Another character worth mentioning is the droid K2SO, an Imperial combat droid who is reprogrammed to become a rebel defector. When this movie first came out, everybody was talking about this character, and rightfully so. I mean, they gave him all the funniest lines, but it was legitimately refreshing to see a droid actually kick as much ass as this one does. And I'm not talking about the goofiness that R2-D2 uses in Revenge of the Sith. We literally see him thrashing around stormtroopers and use a blaster with the same efficiency as Han Solo does. He's a truly unique character, and he does bring a lot to this film. He was one of the main highlights character-wise. Most of the villains in this film are recurring characters, namely there's Grand Moff Tarkin and Darth Vader, of course. The chief new villain here is Orson Krennic, played by Ben Mendelsohn, and he's basically the chief operative officer of the Death Star. He basically conceived the Death Star. And his primary purpose in this film is to assert his authority on the Death Star. He wants to make sure that he's kept in charge, but he's also defending his failed actions as a commanding officer with all of these security breaches that have been going on. So he reminds me a lot of the General Hux character from The Force Awakens, in that there's enough presence there for him to be kind of a mildly threatening enemy, but in the presence of like Darth Vader and Tarkin, he's small potatoes. I'm not going to spoil much about Darth Vader aside from the fact that he is in the film, and by now you've probably, if you haven't seen the film, you've heard reviews of it. People have already talked about him enough. This film does make Darth Vader scary again, and I did think that they utilized him just the right way. I was afraid that they were going to overutilize him. I know that's kind of going against the grain, and I know a lot of people really wanted to see more of him. My feeling about Darth Vader is that he died in Return of the Jedi, and we had 3 movies that talked about him as Anakin Skywalker and how he fell from grace, and I really would like to see Star Wars not rely on such an iconic character, because he is arguably the most iconic movie villain of all time, if not in the top 3. So, you know, I would like to see them kind of rely on having a successful Star Wars film without having him there in some form. And yes, he was in this movie, and he was such a dark presence, and I thought that was very successful. They did a great job with it because they minimalized how much he's in the film, but that's all the more powerful because when he finally does show up, he's scary again, and that was done really well. Then we have Peter Cushing, who reprises his role as Grand Moff Tarkin, maybe? Not really. I was kind of glad that people were talking about this when the movie came out, that Peter Cushing was in the film, but as a digital character. And the first time I saw it, I mean, I could go into this a lot. So all I'll say is, the first time I saw this, I didn't know what I was looking at because I didn't expect the character to really be in the film, at least not as Peter Cushing. When I first saw him, when they had like the back of his head, I thought it was a different actor stepping in for the character, like what you saw at the end of Revenge of the Sith. But then it was Peter Cushing, and it was distracting because I didn't know what I was looking at. Was it I didn't know if it was a stand-in actor where they had digitally put the face on? I wasn't sure. So rather than focusing on those scenes in terms of the story, I was focusing on what did they do there. Then I kind of did the research, going in and seeing the film a second time just the other day, knowing that scene was going to be there. I was actually expecting Tarkin, and I was really trying to examine the animation flaws, and I had to look really hard. Like, they did it really well. My feelings on resurrecting deceased actors digitally to bring them back into recognizable roles, if you stay towards the end of the credits, you'll realize that both Peter Cushing's estate and Carrie Fisher, they both gave their permission to have their likenesses represented in the movie. And as long as they're giving their permissions, the respective estates or whatever, giving the permission, I'm fine with it. But the other thing to consider is this hypothesis called the uncanny valley. And basically what this hypothesis states is that when we as humans look at something that's supposed to represent a human, but it's not 100% real, we start thinking about its imperfections, and we get a natural feeling of uneasiness because we know that what we're looking at isn't actually real. Basically, an example would be like in a movie when, like in Rogue One, there's other movies that have done this before where they try to make an older actor look younger. And they did this in Tron Legacy when they attempted to make Jeff Bridges look like he did back in 1981. So here I thought it was done really well, and all I want to say about this without going into too much detail is I think the reason why we spent so much time paying attention to it was because the really true diehard fans know that character and know the actor Peter Cushing knew that he was deceased, so knew that couldn't possibly be him, and we spent too much time analyzing it. But I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who don't know who Peter Cushing is and who aren't as familiar with Star Wars. It'd be really interesting to see them go into the film and see how they reacted to that scene, not knowing anything about that actor. Because I really tried to look, and aside from maybe the voice, but even if you've never heard Peter Cushing before, then that aspect of it you wouldn't know that much about either. You know what I'm saying? So I thought it was really interesting, and I liked that they used the Tarkin character rather than them using Darth Vader the whole time. I wouldn't have really wanted a movie where Darth Vader is just kind of standing around the whole movie. So again, by using Tarkin in that position, as he should, because that's the position he held in the original film, I'm glad that they kind of made Darth Vader's appearance more minimal, because again, it made Darth Vader much more awesome in the end. The action. This is where this movie really shines. It blew me away. One of the positives I'll say about the 2014 Godzilla is Gareth Edwards really knows how to represent scale. And action movies today, they don't really seem to have a plan or a flow to them. Even a fun movie like Guardians of the Galaxy, when you get into the action aspects of movies like that, it's a lot of colorful explosions and a lot of, smart-ass characters back-talking each other. George Lucas described the dogfights in the original Star Wars as kind of a space ballet, and we're back to that here. And you saw that a little bit in The Force Awakens, but here nonstop, like, you actually see X-Wings following TIE fighters. You get the terrifying aspects of the AT-ATs as they start to emerge from the forests on this beach on Scarif, and it's terrifying. Gareth Edwards is really good at scale, and I hadn't had this much fun watching a film since Return of the Jedi. This is just fantastic action work. The entire third act of this film is well worth the price of admission. That being said, my favorite parts of this movie as a whole were all the little connections it made to other films. And that might seem counterintuitive depending on what you were expecting going in. When I was going into this film, I honestly was expecting a very different experience. And it is much grittier, much darker. It's almost like watching a World War II film set obviously in a Star Wars universe. Things like witnessing the rebels actually downloading the stolen plans and in a last-ditch effort trying to get them to Princess Leia at the last minute, and seeing Bail Organa come back from the prequels and talk about how he's going to actually go and get in contact with Obi-Wan Kenobi, and even seeing fun little appearances from Cornelius Evazan and Ponda Baba. You just watch yourself. I have the death sentence on 12 systems. That stuff made it all worth it for me. In a film that really could have been dry and could have really taken itself really seriously, those little things really lined up the mood and made the movie overall much more of a joy to me. Now, the way that Lucasfilm handled the events in this film kind of clued me into what their plans are for future standalone Star Wars films. Now, the next one is going to be chronicling a young Han Solo, and it's now in production. And this is kind of my theory on it, and nothing's been announced yet officially from Disney, but I would expect to see a scene in the Han Solo film of Han Solo actually doing the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs. I'd expect to see a scene where we find out why Lando and Han had a falling out that we see in The Empire Strikes Back, for example. And I bet you dollars to donuts that movie's going to end with Han Solo trying to evade a bunch of Imperial ships, dropping the spice, which triggers the confrontation between Han and Jabba the Hutt. So, again, nothing's been official yet. That's just my little fun theory. But these little connect-the-dot moments, if they can, make them as enjoyable as this, because this was a good film. Despite kind of a rocky first act, it does get better, and again, the action scenes are great, and the little ways it connects to all the other films, especially A New Hope, is fantastic. I mean, you could watch this, and literally, A New Hope probably takes place about 10 minutes after this ends. So this is pretty much episode 3.5. Rogue One: A Star Wars Story is a fun film. It's definitely a worthy addition to the expanding cinematic universe that Disney and Lucasfilm have continued to expand on, starting with The Force Awakens. Now, the Blu-ray and the DVD does come out April 4th, so grab your lightsabers and head on over to pick it up. Because remember, I am one with the Force, and the Force is with me. Take care, and as always, thanks for watching my videos. Bye-bye.